Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This is the Sports Spectrum Podcast. My name is Jason Romano. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's show. We are grateful and thankful to have you joining us and checking out the program here today. As always, you can subscribe and download the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are found. Click that subscribe button because then you will not miss an episode. And we've had a bunch of these episodes, almost 50 of them now. And so when you click that subscribe button, it will automatically come to your device, your tablet, your phone, whatever it is that you listen to podcasts on, so you never miss an episode. And as always, you can find all of our content, including our podcasts, on sportspectrum.com. Today's guest, his name is Justin Wren, and his story is unbelievable. He is an MMA fighter, he's a humanitarian, he's an author, and he has one of the most unreal stories and journeys that I've ever heard. This guy has lived a life of brokenness, of struggle, and somehow, some way, thanks to the grace of God and perseverance within him, he's able to overcome all that and be able to make a gigantic difference, not just in the United States, but an impact unlike many I've talked to around the world, in Africa, in the Congo. So I'm not going to do a whole lot of introduction here other than saying this story is crazy. So stick with me here. It's a little long. This story is crazy. So spend some time, invest some time here, and listen to our interview. Without further ado, here he is, MMA fighter, humanitarian, author, the incredible story of Justin Wren. Justin, thanks for joining us here. How are you?
Man, I'm doing really, really well. I'm really excited to be part of today's episode and podcast. And I just thank you and the followers you have to allow me to have this opportunity, this platform to share my story.
Yeah, man, your story is incredible. And I'm excited to dive deep into that with you. But first of all, let's talk about MMA a little bit. And I just want to know from, a kind of a casual fan perspective, which is what I am. I'll watch the fights, the events, the UFC 120s or whatever it is occasionally, but I'm not watching it like intently. So from just a layman fan here who just is sort of a casual fan, describe the training that goes on to prepare for an MMA fight.
Yeah. So MMA, to break it down kind of real simple, it combines a lot of different Olympic kind of combat sports and puts them into one. I mean, from the Olympic sport of wrestling, judo, boxing, taekwondo, and then other sports such as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, catch wrestling. I mean, just anything that's hand-to-hand combat is basically an MMA if it works. So MMA is kind of the training grounds or the proving grounds where you can showcase what works from each style. And then the fighters now, since it's become so advanced or evolved over the years, it used to be style versus style. Now every single guy has to know so much about every sport. So the training that goes into it is a lot of cross training from, I was a wrestler, background with that, a two-time national champion, lived at the Olympic Training Center. But if I just go in there with wrestling, if I can't take the guy down, I'll get knocked out. Or if the guy's great at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if I can't keep it on my feet, he'll get me to the ground and he'll be able to submit me. And so it's kind of like a human chess match, and I just absolutely love that aspect. And we train about 2-3 times a day, 6 days a week. You have your sparring days, you have your wrestling on certain days, your jiu-jitsu on other days, your strength and conditioning every day. And then so you're working both anaerobic and aerobic exercises from boxing to wrestling. Like they're two completely different cardios or conditioning. I remember going from wrestling and into boxing. I was in shape to compete internationally in wrestling, and then I got in a ring and started throwing punches, and I was exhausted after the first round or two. And vice versa. Guys come from the striking aspect and they come into wrestling, and they just get worn out real quick. So you got to know everything. It's definitely a thinking man's sport. It is not a barroom brawl. It's not a street fight. I know from on the surface, or if you're maybe not even a casual fan, but you've never really given it a chance, it's easy to write it off as I think whenever people are maybe uneducated on it and can't see, how to appreciate how, wow, this is an Olympian here, this is an NCAA champion here, this is a lifelong martial artist, and they're getting in there and competing against one another. For me, it's the most strategic sport there is. There's a lot of great sports. I love them all. But there's just none compared to all the different aspects and strategies of MMA.
What was the toughest adjustment for you? You're a wrestler, and we're going to talk about how you got into wrestling and sort of became a wrestler in a little bit. But because you have a wrestling background, what was the toughest adjustment for you? Was it the boxing?
I, I transitioned into it pretty smoothly. I was lucky. I was surrounded by a lot of great people. And I started off at a pace where my first fights were professional and never took an amateur fight, but it was because I was an accomplished wrestler. And man, I'm trying to think for you. I think it kind of flowed smoothly for me, but I think the adjustment for me is a wrestler's pace is just go, 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 100 miles an hour from start to finish. And you can do that for a 6-minute match. But for a 15 or 25-minute fight, you have to learn to keep a little bit more gas in the tank, and you have to know when to really turn up the heat and when to kind of pump the brakes a little bit, when to kind of relax in the fight, which is you never take a minute off in wrestling. And so you're not really taking a minute off in fighting, but you're studying the guy, you're conserving your energy, and then whenever you see the moment, you explode. And so, yeah, I think that's been the adjustment for me, is because I fight better and I perform better whenever I'm in the wrestler mentality of just break the guy, like go, 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 push him past his limits. And so you just have to be careful that you don't push yourself past your limits. And he was able to relax and weather the storm and then come back.
I'm curious, the pain threshold here. What's the pain like? Describe the pain that you're in after a fight and when it's over and you're trying to just kind of recover. What's that like? Because you hear a lot about it from football players. The morning after is just brutal. What's it like after an MMA fight?
Probably pretty much the same, or it depends. If it's a quick night in and out, my last fight was only 2.5 minutes, and I actually didn't get punched. I took him right down, and then I went to work and ended it pretty quick. So that was came out without a mark on me. So the next day, I actually was able to go film more of a documentary, and we didn't expect that. We thought it would be like the next week, but the next day I was. Other times, after a 3-round war, where you're punching, kicking, your legs get beat up, your shins get beat up, your forearms get beat up, your shoulders get beat up, you might have a couple of goose eggs or mouses under your eyes or black eyes. So I don't know. I think for me it's the training up to the fight that actually is even worse, because you're trying to simulate the fight, and you're doing that multiple times a week, and so you get pretty banged up in training. I mean, I've had separated ribs and separated AC joints and dislocated elbow and broken ankle, and so there's been quite a lot of war wounds, but most of them have come from training. I don't think I've actually sustained an injury in a fight per se.
Separated ribs just sounds so painful.
Oh man, you don't want to breathe.
Oh, it sounds so painful.
You take the smallest little breaths.
Oh, I can't even imagine. We're talking to Justin Wren here. He is a MMA fighter. Justin, obviously Sports Spectrum, the intersection of faith and sport. So I want to talk about your faith a little bit here and how that took shape for you. When did that begin? At what point for you did you make Jesus Christ the Lord of your life?
I would say that I kind of grew up with a little bit of a faith background. I had family that were in ministry, pastors and things like that, worked at churches. But I would say that upbringing, my immediate family, we left any church, just didn't want any part of it because of all the woundings and the scarring and the bad background with religion. And so the relationship with Christ didn't start until 7 years and 4 months ago today.
Wow.
And so
you know the exact date.
Yeah. Just to give you a little bit of a background, like my childhood dream became a reality. At 13 years old, I wanted to fight. And the reason I wanted to become a fighter was because I looked up to him. I loved the chess match of it whenever I stumbled upon it, but I also grew up getting very, very heavily bullied. And so when I saw fighting, I thought, those guys probably don't get bullied. If I could ever transition or transform myself into one of those guys, I bet I'd be confident, or I wouldn't be a loner, or I wouldn't, feel all these different ways. So anyways, fast forward, I became a couple-time national champ, was on the reality TV show The Ultimate Fighter. At 21 years old, I was the youngest heavyweight signed at the highest level. And 23 years old, I'm getting ready to be the main event at the Hard Rock in Las Vegas. I had, wrestled in Moscow, kickboxed in Amsterdam, main event at the Hard Rock in Vegas, and yet I found myself as a depressed, drunk drug addict. So that childhood dream became a reality, but it turned into a nightmare really, really fast. Because one, I didn't know how to handle the success, but two, I think the reason I couldn't handle it the most was because all that hard work didn't fulfill me. Even when I was accomplishing stuff, even whenever I was in front of all the lights, and there was tons of people in the arena, it just showed me how alone I was, and how I was living in darkness. And so, my mom had broken into my house because I went missing for about 8 weeks. She found cocaine and tons and tons of opioid bottles, or opiates and oxy, and bongs, and just liquor bottles everywhere, and a loaded gun. And she was really, really worried. My addictions got really, really bad. And the thing that kind of sort of started snapping me out of it was my best friend had called and left me a voicemail. In this 8-week period, I literally don't really have any memory but this. And I woke up in a drug house in Colorado. I was hitchhiking from kind of, just terrible place to terrible place, and sleeping around, just in these new places with new people that I didn't even know. And it was like pigsties inside there. It was tough. And my best friend on the voicemail, so I had probably 70 plus voicemails. And I just listened to the most recent one because it was my best friend back to back to back.
Right.
And when I listened to the most recent one, it said, I can't believe, he's on the other line. He says, I can't believe you missed my wedding. I can't believe my best friend, or my best man, didn't show up. And
wow.
So, that was kind of rock bottom for me. It did intensify after that. My roommate, who is a really great guy, and is now my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding. He exposed me to the entire fight team that I was on, and I got kicked off the team. It was 34-1. 35 professional athletes and coaches, one of the best teams in the world. Had multiple UFC champions on it at the time. I'm the youngest guy there. I was invited there only a year and a half earlier. Came in with a lot of promise, and then I got voted into the team after the Ultimate Fighter, and then a year and a half later, I got voted off, 35 or something to 1.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the rock bottom moment, and that was in a very short amount of time. And these guys reached out and said that I needed to come on a retreat, that it would be something where I could figure out life and get help. And so I thought it was kind of a drug retreat, drug rehab center kind of thing. And then I found out it was faith-based, and then I was like, oh man, I didn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
And then I said no. And then this youth pastor paid for my trip, or paid for the retreat. And I called him up once I found the receipt in my email, and I said, man, you just wasted your money. I'm not coming. And you got a wife and kids, take care of them. And the next day I woke up and had a plane ticket from Colorado to Texas. And I'm like, man, you're wasting your money. And then the roommate I kicked out of my house because I felt like he exposed me, and I felt like he stabbed me in the back, even though he's just caring about me. I see that now, but at the time I felt like he stabbed me in the back.
Right.
And so the next day he's texting me, hey bro, I know we're not on good terms, but who's this guy? What's this trip? And why do I have the receipts and my in my email to go on the trip and to fly out with you? And so these guys they were pursuing me, saying, we know this is your answer. And I found out it wasn't even a retreat to like help people like that. It was just a Christian men's retreat. And I went very reluctantly. I went saying, sitting around a fire, holding hands, singing Kumbaya. Like that's,
Right.
that's not going to do anything for me. Like I need a real answer to a very, very real problem. Man, I got there, and all my doubts, all my insecurities, all the judgment, I was just so blown away that man, this place was so full of love and goodness and really Jesus. I just didn't know that at the time. And people were just loving on me. And I took drugs with me, pills and THC, like tinctures. And, I was using the first 3 days I was there. And because I, at the time, like my mind didn't just want it, but my body needed it. And and I could function pretty well on it. And by the third day, man, I just was so broken. I made so many judgments about Christians, and I graduated high school with my favorite quote being from Gandhi. It said, "I like your Christ," or I had two favorite quotes, but it said, "Be the change you want to see in the world," and the other one was, "I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians.
Yeah.
Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." And so I'm saying that a lot, but I just share that because if people knew the background I had growing up with religion, how painful it was and how scarring it was and how manipulative it was and just damaging with religion and people who abused that and used that to twist and actually do some terrible things. I think that would be well founded, all my kind of judgment against it. But really, I don't know. On that trip, I guess if I had to sum it up, I felt like I was shown like I got to get my eyes off of the quote unquote people of God, whoever they say they may be, and I need to get my eyes on the God of the people, the God of all people. And when I did that and saw these people loving, like it just, I would say it loved the hell out of me. It blessed the mess out of me. They started speaking my language. They said, "Man, Jesus is the ultimate fighter, not you." And, he fought a fight that no one else could fight. It was a flawless fight. He lived a life that no one else could live. And he did it and died and conquered the grave and rose from the dead. And he did that so that you can have a relationship with God, the creator. And so that, you could walk in victory over these struggles. And all you have to do is tap out. All you have to do is surrender. And for me at first, that boggled my mind, or it was counterintuitive, because I'm like, if you tap out, if you quit, you lose. Being a fighter, you're taught never quit. And that was something I prided myself on. I've still never tapped out. I've never given up. I've never done that. And but they told me this is the one time that if you give up, you tap out, you surrender, you'll be given the greatest victory you've ever been given, you could ever win. And it was freely given to you as a gift. Just receive it.
Wow.
And so, man, it loved the hell out of me.
That is awesome. That's such a great story. And there's so much to unpack there, because your story, I'm almost not sure we're going to have enough time to get to all of it. So we're going to try our best here to get to as much of it as possible. But I want to just go back a little bit and unpack the bullying aspect of what you described. You kind of not glanced over it, but mentioned that you got into wrestling, into fighting because you were bullied. I'm just curious, because this is obviously before you become a Christian.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated to know, especially being the dad of a 13-year-old girl, and the bullying is, I think, a little different from the girl side to the boy side, but it still very much exists in that realm on the female side as well. But for you, what ages are the bullying take place, and how bad did it really get for you?
Wow. Well, man, just thinking about your 13-year-old daughter, I have a lot of people in the the sports world just toughen up, or why didn't you just toughed up and got through it, right? Like that's what kids should do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, no, for 10 years I wanted to kill myself.
10 years.
Yeah, I battled with suicidal thoughts or clinical depression from 13 to 23.
Wow.
And suicidal thoughts really, really from 13 to 15, they subsided from maybe 16 to to 21, and then they ramped up again 22, 23. So at least 4 years of my life, I was like not just every now and then like, oh, poor me, I want to kill myself. Like no, like contemplating, like planning it out, and seriously like I'm just that kind of guy. If I make my mind up, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And thank God this is the one thing that I haven't done. I've attempted it, but thank God like He spared me. And so basically, the bullying started in third grade and really went on through heavily till eighth grade. But my parents moved me schools from ninth and 10th, and they actually moved me out of that school again because of some bullying too. And an opportunity to go pursue wrestling, but also because the bullying started getting real bad again. So, but I would say the height of it was your daughter's age, 13 years old. I would sit at the lunch table by myself, get pelted in the back of the head with chocolate milk spitwads or food, and I was heavy set. So in the locker rooms, this is a sports spectrum, in the locker room, I was teased all the time. Guys having me in the corner, twisting on my fat and my nipples and, different stuff and doing it in front of the girls and calling me worthless and different things. And basically I have two kind of bullying stories, but I mean, that really highlight it. But one, I'll just get to the main one. And I was 13, got invited to my middle school crush's birthday party, and I absolutely had a huge, massive crush on her. Like if we could go back, everyone listening to whenever you were in 7th or 8th grade,
Oh yeah.
and that crush you had, and so this was mine, and it was, I think, bigger than everyone else's, and she was the most popular girl in school. And I got an invitation to her birthday party, and everyone started talking about what they were going to wear, because on the invitation it said it was a costume contest and the winner gets a prize. And so I was excited, and her dad even worked at Dr. Pepper, and there was a Dr. Pepper prize kit or something that they were giving away. And and I knew that she loved Transformers. So everyone was talking about what they were going to wear, but I knew what she liked. And so I was like, okay, she likes Dr. Pepper. Their house is decorated in it supposedly, and they have a Dr. Pepper machine inside their house. I heard the rumors around school, you don't even have to pay, you just push the button, it pops it out. And so I went to the grocery store and bought some duct tape and a bunch of cases of Dr. Pepper, and I made myself from head to toe into a Dr. Pepper transformer, and I thought it was going to be awesome. And my mom
Sounds awesome.
said, this is awesome, like she's going to love this. And I'm like, yes. I get to her house. Mimi answers the door. She's like, oh, Jennifer's going to love this. And she walks me to the backyard. Oh, and I got to stop and actually push the button, pop out a Dr. Pepper, go to the backyard. And I was feeling like I was nervous because I wasn't, the most popular kid in school, but I was also excited that like she's going to see how much effort I went through to do this, and I'm going to win this prize. So I get to the backyard and door opens up, and I get hit with a couple flashes of light, and when my eyes adjust, I see fingers pointing at me. I hear laughter, and I see that nobody else is dressed up. And I hear Jennifer say, I can't believe you thought you were good enough to come to my party.
Whoa.
So my middle school crush, crushed me. And then the guy next to her said, you're worthless. And I just felt absolutely worthless. And then the guy on the other side, my notorious middle school bully named Justin, shared the same name as I. He said, you should just kill yourself. And when he said that, I felt like worthless. I felt like I wasn't good enough, and I felt like I should kill myself. And I remember running away from there. Like literally, I ran away from the home, and found myself at a Dairy Queen down the street. I sat, behind the dumpsters, and in the fence, and just sat there and ripped off the Dr. Pepper stuff, threw it in the trash can. So, then a worker came out, saw me sitting there, and said, oh, honey, like, what's going on? Come on inside. Call your mom. This was before cell phones. My mom was running errands. I couldn't get a hold of her for a long time. She finally went home and checked the voicemail. she came to Dairy Queen and found me there. I still have like the sticky duct tape marks all over my shorts and jeans and stuff. And man, I was just crushed. Like for that was like a Friday or Saturday night, and I didn't go back to school until Wednesday or Thursday because I was quote unquote sick. I just couldn't bear to face my the fellow students, and they
Your
were passing
peers.
around pictures. Yeah,
Yeah.
my peers. So it was really, really tough, man, growing up with that kind of life. And I've had my parents, like, they've bullying's really, really real, and um, it's just nuts. Like my parents, they own a photography company, and they made a memorial plaque for a family they knew not too well, but knew them, and for their son, who was 9 years old when he hung himself because the bullying was so bad at his school. And it just
9
blows
years
me
old.
away. 9 years
Yeah.
old, I couldn't even imagine, but at the same time, I could, because
Yeah.
at 8 years old, I was getting bullied, and I was really, really scared and timid and everything else.
I got a couple questions off this. First, if you don't mind sharing, you said you attempted one time
Yeah.
to end it. What was that moment like, and what did that consist of? I've never been. My dad, unfortunately, has had that situation come where he wanted to end his life. He was not successful as well, thank God. But I'm just curious for you, like, what was the moment like when you thought that was the end of it? That was the time.
Well, it was actually like during that that 8 weeks. Oh, and I had several of, and man, my family could tell you, like, there's been multiple times I've just dropped off the map,
Sure.
um, and it almost goes back to that childhood of running away from then. And there was another instance where I ran away, um, and so, man, I just took off one time, and I had coke and weed and shrooms and tons of pills, and a whole bottle of Everclear. And I got to a house of people I don't know, and I took basically everything I could before I got there, arrived, and I guess I just blacked out. But I took everything with the intent that I'm not going to wake up from this.
Hmm.
And, and man, I did, but when I woke up, it was real scary because, like, it was, I don't know if you call it an overdose or if you call it, like, I mean, I didn't die, but
Right.
it was like almost. And I mean, not almost dying, but there's something freaky happened in my body where I woke up with this guy saying, "Justin, you gotta drink," like, and I'm taking this water bottle that's in my mouth, and I just crush it, and I remember like half of it or a quarter of it going in my mouth and the rest of it just going all over me. And it was because I had never been so thirsty in
Hmm.
all my life. And I couldn't imagine being that thirsty. And I remember like this heat wave, like coming over my body, and then followed by these like crazy cold chills. And I was in this cold sweat, just broken out. And yeah, so I just, that kind of startled me, woke me up, and was like, man, and that's after that was whenever I found out I missed my best friend's wedding, and like
Right.
being the best man, and left that dark cloud over his wedding, and then I got kicked off my fight team. And so actually the attempt came before those two things, and then I was just sitting there thinking, like, but that whole time after the best friend thing, I'm like, I got to do it again and do it right. After getting kicked off the team, I was like, I got to do it again, I got to do it right.
Yeah.
um,
The depression is real here. It's really kicking in pretty bad.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like, um, yeah, like a dark cloud just constantly over you, and like this quicksand that you're walking in, and just feel like you're getting deeper and deeper and barely holding your nose above.
The bullying that you talked about earlier, I know you've done a ton of speaking, and we're going to talk about how you've sort of turned your craziness, your mess, if you will, into your message, and turning
Hmm.
up, the terrible things in your life into into a positive. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But in the times that you've spoken, and I know you've spoken to a lot of students, a lot of schools about bullying, what's the response? What's the reaction? Because it is real. And my daughter, I don't think she's been bullied per se. At least she hasn't really opened up about it too much. I'm pretty sure she's fairly confident, whatever you want to call it, at being a 13-year-old in 8th grade, but I know it exists, and we've talked about it a little bit, and I'm just curious from you what the response has been. You don't have to share specific stories, but just when you share your story, what kind of impact it has on these kids more than the adults. Like, I can be moved by it at 40 years old, but these children, these 7th, 8th, 9th graders, when you share it, what kind of response do you get?
Yeah, I would say that there's people that whenever they come up to me, I mean, I think some of the statistics say that it's over 80% of students have experienced some level of bullying at one time or another. Maybe not like serial bullying, where it's just happening all the time, but some instance of it. I think like 90% happens out of the eyes of school staff or officials. So
Right.
you look for dark corners and locker rooms and behind the bleachers and all that kind of stuff. And but man, when I share my story, like a lot of the kids can't believe it happened to me because I'm a wrestler,
You're a big, bad,
fighter,
strong guy, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I think it comes from a place where once they start hearing the stories and how much it affected me, I've had instances with both the victims and the bullies, and the parents and the teachers and the faculty like come up and tell me different stories that are just blow me away, or bully saying like they're done doing it and they realize that how much they hurt and how much they've been hurting others. But just, and you said not a specific story, but one thing stands out to me is
Sure.
I met this little boy, and I won't use his name, but he reminded me a little bit of me. I think I thought I was the last person with the chili bowl haircut, growing up, and but this little guy had one, and he was about 12 years old. I remember when I was 12 or 13, I was already like 230, 35 pounds, something like that. This little guy was, very heavy set too, big glasses, chili bowl haircut, and came up with a pro wrestling T-shirt on. I think it was like John Cena on his shirt,
Right.
and came up and just gave me a hug and started to cry.
Wow.
And I told him, hey buddy, it's okay, it's okay, and hang in there, and just encouraged him, and didn't get enough time that I would have liked to spend with him. But later, his mother hit me up on, I think, Facebook or Twitter, something like that, and she told me his story, because what I always try to encourage the kids to do is open up, don't keep it in. You got to share. Your parents want to hear what's going on in your life. They care about you. Your teachers do. There's a counselor here who's on staff just to listen to you and your problems, and to love you and counsel you and care about you and be there for you and guide you. And that's why they got into this job. And your friends, find a friend, stay close. Police, pick out on the person that's alone or in the back of the pack. And so anyways, his mom hit me up saying that, he came home that day crying and said that he had to open up to her about something that he never thought he would, be able to tell her or anyone, but that for 2 years now he's been thinking about killing himself.
Mm.
And the bullying's gotten so bad, and she knew the bullying was bad, but he stopped talking about it and just held it all in. And so he went home and he opened up and he talked to her about it. And she said, thank you for sharing your story, because it got my son to share his story. And we're going to take action, and we're going to make sure that this stops, or that he has help, and that he's seeing a counselor and different stuff like that. And so just thinking about that little guy, my heart really went out to him, and just saw myself, um, at his age. And so,
But that's worth
anyways,
it. I mean, it's
yeah,
if
so
you
worth it.
only affect one child, one kid, it's worth it.
Oh yeah,
You know?
without a shadow of a doubt. Like I went there that day, and sometimes as a public speaking is my number one fear, without a doubt. But I've seen things like that happen, and
Yeah.
God's led me into it. I tried to say no. I actually did say no about 9 times, 8 or 9 times before.
I can
And I would tell
relate.
people, I'm a fighter, not a speaker. I don't have the ability to do that. And then I kind of had some quiet time and talked with the guy that led me to Christ, and he's like, "Do you think it's up to your ability to for God, or your availability to God? Like, why don't you
Mm.
just give him your availability and just say, God, if this is what you want, like open the door, and I'll step through it, but I need your help." And once I started doing that, like, I mean, I still get up there, my hands shake, and
Yeah.
I start to sweat. But after moments like that, it's like, man, and I remember that day thinking like, it was one of my first times speaking about bullying. And I started to kind of cry in front of the kids,
Hmm.
thinking back to where I was then. But me being able to do that and afterwards thinking, I shouldn't have cried, and what was everyone thinking? And I mean, I probably look like a fool up there. The little guy comes up and gives me a huge hug, and then that turns into that. So made it so worth it.
Well, it's one thing I can relate because I have a story as well that I've been sharing, and I've really avoided sharing it for a long time about the relationship with my dad. And somebody once told me that if you have a story that can impact others and you don't share it, you're being selfish, and you might be
Wow.
holding back from what God wants to do. And that really opened my eyes, and I just wanted to share that because I think that's the case with you, Justin. It's just God has allowed you these opportunities, even if, like I said, if it's one person that you share your story with that gets impacted by it, then it's all worth it. And he's going to use that to impact other people's lives and take your brokenness and make it somebody else's blessing.
Hmm.
You know?
Man, that is such an encouragement. I needed to hear that. Thank you so much.
We're talking to Justin Wren here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And Justin, man, your story, I'm just so grateful to have you on the podcast and share, because there's so many different layers and so many different things that you've been through and walked through. I want to talk a little bit back on the sports side about your wrestling career. You said you were a 2-time state champ in wrestling in high school and set to attend Iowa State and wrestle under the legend Cael Sanderson. But an injury occurred for you and something happened where you weren't able to wrestle. So tell us the story of wrestling through high school, becoming a state champ, and then ending up at Iowa State.
Yeah. So actually, growing up in wrestling, like God blessed me before I even knew him. I had a late start. I started wrestling at 15 years old, and it didn't click at first. The first year of wrestling, I won one match by 1 point, but I had 2 Olympic gold medalists as my high school coaches. It was Kenny Monday, Kendall Cross, and they were both like a 3-time NCAA champs at OSU, and having those guys as coaches and training partners, like you get good quick. Even though I was losing the first year, ended up winning several state championships and 2 national championships, and then I went to the Olympic Training Center out of high school. So I actually skipped and didn't go to Iowa State first, even though I was recruited there. I went to the Olympic Training Center, got injured while I was there, broke my arm, dislocated it, tore the ulnar collateral ligament, had to get that completely replaced. And man, that's whenever the depression set back in, the addictions took over. I was having to wait like 4 months to get surgery. And the whole time they could just give me the strongest opiates out there. And so I became hooked to it because it only takes like 11 days or 9 days or something like that to get an addiction to this drug. Mm-hmm. The average prescription for it though is 14 days, but you get addicted to it at 9 days or 11 days. And so I find that, just ironic that, man, why do we prescribe it for so long then on average? But, man, I used it for 4 months. And from there, after I healed up and after I was able to start competing again, or actually once I was healing up, I became a medical redshirt at Iowa State, was recruited there by Cael Sanderson. And then I started to fight. And that was early. That was like 2005, 2006, 2007. And I fought for a few years, had success. And then, I ended up giving my life to Christ at 23. That was in 2010. And I walked away from fighting. I walked away on a win streak. And I was called by reporters, fans, and my father, that I was just one big waste of talent. And for stepping away from the sport at such a young age and saying that I might not ever go back to it. But I knew that I needed to build a foundation in my faith and a foundation in sobriety too, and a different kind of lifestyle. And so I thought it was just going to be a year where I stepped away from the sport. But about a year into my faith, 11 months into it, I just had this life, gave my life to Christ, and that definitely changed the course and direction of my life. But then about 11 months in, I found out, man, God will direct us if we ask.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that, what you're talking about in a moment, but I just want to go back to what you said about walking away from the sport and the questions that you heard from the media and the press, but you mentioned kind of subtly there that your dad said that too. And I'm curious from a relationship aspect, what that was like during that time of new faith, and God kind of working in you, what that was like, obviously, with your parents, with the support from your family, but specifically with what you said your dad told you.
Yeah. And man, I haven't said that publicly, but I think it's okay. And love my dad. He loves me.
Yep.
But yeah, it was real tough. Like him and my relationship, I feel like was one of the reasons why I was so performance driven.
Hmm.
And I felt like our only real relationship growing up was whenever I performed well in sports. And so he was kind of the overbearing dad that would get kicked out of little league baseball games because he was way too vocal and arguing with the judges or refs or arguing with the coach. I got kicked off one team growing up. And so, man, it was just tough because my dad was so proud of who I became in wrestling. That
Right.
was going to be a national champion, that I went to the Olympic Training Center. You know, he had all the Olympic rings all over his shirts and everything once I got recruited there and once I went to live there and was telling everyone his son's going to be an Olympian. And then I made the change to MMA, and then he was even more excited because I started winning professional fights and millions of people could watch. I think one of my fights, 6.8 million people tuned in, and he'd walk around and he was almost like a promoter for me,
Sure.
saying, "This is my son and this is what he does," and I'm
Yep.
so proud of him. And that was kind of the depth of our bond at that time. And so when I stepped away, he's like, "Well, what are you going to do? You don't have a degree. You don't have a job. Like, what are you going to do?" And I go, "I don't know, Dad. I'm gonna figure it out." But he's like, "Well, you have this career and you have all this promise, and you've been told since you were 19, like you can be a world champion at this, and you can set up a great future. Like, you don't have all the time in the world. You're going to waste it." And whenever I stood up and said, "Dad," like, and he's been really, really judgmental against Christians too. He's way more scarred from it than I am.
Yeah.
Uh, and he's just like, "Oh, so you're going to go become some pastor or missionary, and you're just going to be, some bleepity bleep waste of talent." And man, that was rough because I was like, "Dad, I'm going to go try to help people."
Yeah.
I discovered a quote that really impacted my life. It said, like, it can sound cheesy, but it's like, no act of kindness, no matter how small, ever goes wasted. And that propelled me into like volunteering at a children's hospital, then a drug rehab, then the homeless rescue mission, then a youth group, then at-risk youth, then just over and over, like all these different opportunities that had my head on a swivel saying, "God, like, just let me bless people. Like, I used to fight against people, but now I want to fight for people. And Lord, you made me a fighter. You gave me a fighter's heart. Like, let me dig deep. And whenever people are going through really tough times, like I've gone through, let me be someone that will fight on their behalf and fight on your behalf and fight for the kingdom and fight for them. And
Right.
like, fight for the kingdom, fight for the king, and fight for the king's kids. Like that's what I want to do with my life, is love God, love people, push back darkness." And it was tough that my dad just didn't see anything about that. And being a parent, I can understand. Like, I went 11 months completely jobless. All I did was fight for a living. But it's so funny how God would just provide everything that I needed right at the right time. Like
Yep.
rent or
Yep.
food for cheese and crackers or whatever, and or money for food. And so it would just be. It was amazing to watch God work in that time.
It's one thing to have a faith. It's another thing to have an active faith and to want to do
Mm.
more for others, like you said. And in 2011, you kind of alluded to this, and I want to take us there now. You had this life-changing experience, this moment which really changed the course of your life forever. And this is after you become a Christian, after God gets a hold of you. Tell us what happened. Just take us to that moment and what happened.
Yeah. So, man, and I just heard my pastor say last few weekends. He said that a faith that hasn't been tested can't be trusted, or maybe he said a faith that can't, or the faith that has been tested can be trusted. I
Mm,
think that's how he said it.
yep.
Um, and so this was a real test of my faith. One, to just go jobless for a year and think I would go right back into fighting a year later. But 11 months in, I got rocked, and my whole life changed, and my heart was forever gripped for the Congo, for the Mabuti Pygmies, and a hunter-gatherer society. The men only stand at 4'7" on average. They're the most oppressed people on earth. A lot of anthropologists say that. And I've become second family with them. And I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but how it happened, I say that just because to go into how it happened, I can sound like an absolute nut.
Right.
But it just made me feel like that quote, a faith that
Yeah.
has been tested can be trusted. And like,
Justin,
I just
where is the
trust
Congo?
this.
Just start with that real quick.
Yeah, Congo is in Central Africa, I
Okay.
would say. It goes to east to west. I mean, it's the 10th largest country on the planet. It's got 74 million people. It's a big landmass for sure, probably 3/4 of the continental United States. Um, and so I think it's the largest country in Africa. No, second largest after Algeria, I think. And
Okay.
man, it's an incredible place, incredible beauty with incredible people. But there's also been books wrote about it called King Leopold's Ghost, or the African Holocaust, um, or the Heart of Darkness. And it's because, like, man, there's some of the most evil stuff done on planet Earth there. Congo by BBC is called the rape capital of the world. By the New York Times is called Hell on Earth for women. The average statistic, I think back in like 2013 or 14, was one woman every 1 minute was raped. And like nowhere else on earth compares. And it's just in the culture, not in the culture, but it's because the people are amazing, but in the culture of the rebel groups there, and there's so many. There's at least 38 different warring rebel groups that are there. I think that's actually grown significantly. But there's all these warlords that oversee the gold and coltan and diamonds and aluminum and just all these different mines, even uranium. And so the rubber boom happened there, and back in the early 1900s, 10 million of their 20 million people were killed by the Belgians and the slavery there and all this crazy stuff. So, anyways, the what happened to them then, it hasn't slowed down since. It's kind of just continued, or maybe it's slowed at times, but it also increases. And really, really dangerous place. I've had machine guns pointed at me. A lot of our well drillers that we have on staff that are locals, that are nationals there, they have been child soldiers. They've had families. They've been the lone survivor of their family. And man, it's funny. I'm more timid to share this story with Christians than I am non-Christians, and it's because non-Christians seem to be like, "Wow, really? Like that's incredible." And then Christians, some believe it, and then some are like, "Oh, really? Or are you just making this up?" Or I just feel like the questions,
Yeah.
which is fine, is absolutely fine
Yeah.
for that. And so I'll just get into it. I'll risk it, and actually, and it's okay if some people think I sound crazy,
That's all
but it's
right.
what happened.
Yeah.
And so 11 months in to my faith, I said a prayer, and it was simple. It wasn't anything I was trying to conjure up. I just said, God, okay, so I was really low on money. I was really low on direction. I got my dream fight offered to me to fight at the Saitama Super Arena in Tokyo, Japan. It was against a great opponent for the best money I've ever fought for. And it was like, I almost felt like, oh, my faith has been rewarded. And look, I get to go fight in Japan. And this was my number one thing on my goals list as a kid. Like, God's given it to me. Like, I sacrificed a year. He's given it to me. And whenever I prayed about it, it just felt like, no. It just felt like this isn't the right time. This isn't what you're supposed to do. But it checked all my boxes. It checked everything. It was my dream. And I just couldn't understand why I couldn't accept that fight or take that fight. Like, I felt like, man, it was just perfect for me. But something in my spirit said no. And so then I was a little frustrated and said, okay, God, well, what do you want me to do with my life? And it was kind of like out of frustration and also like hungry to know something. And I just needed God to show up and tell me something. But I didn't know he could communicate like that, or that he would. And man, I was just blown up with this vision. I literally had a movie in my mind, and I saw myself in some rainforest in the world, walking down these footpaths as I got as I kept walking and getting closer to this clearing that I didn't know was ahead in the vision, but like I hear this drumming. Then I get closer and I hear this very distinct singing, almost like a strange yodeling. But and I walk into this clearing and I meet these people, and my heart shatters for them. Like like my emotions, like I saw that they were hungry and thirsty and poor and sick, that they were oppressed. I knew that they were slaves, actual literal slaves. In my vision, I saw a man that was coughing and coughing, and I saw his ribs and his collarbone, and he was like starving, but like he was sick. And later, I would come to know that it's like tuberculosis, but I didn't know what it was in the vision. And like, but man, like the thing that wrecked me the most was that I felt like they felt forgotten by people, but forgotten by God. And when I came out of that vision, I was praying, but like I had to literally get on my knees and my forearms and my face on the ground, and I left a puddle of tears, like a small puddle, but it was I don't know, like a silver dollar size or grandma cookie size puddle of tears. I've never ever cried like that in my life, especially up till that point. I've become a lot more emotional as I've connected with God more and people more and opened up more and softened more.
Sure.
But man, like not at this point. This point, I still had a pretty tough exterior and shell, and this just broke me. And I wrote down on a piece of paper "forgotten," and underneath it was at the top, and then underneath it was poor, sick, hungry, thirsty, oppressed, enslaved. 3 days later, I felt honestly, if I'm just being completely frank, like I had experimented with a lot of like psychedelic drugs before, not before the vision, but before my life with Christ, and
Right.
11 months earlier, and this was like almost like that, but so real, so vivid, and I was so aware, and I was sober during it, and but it felt crazy. I felt nuts. I'm like, did I just have some sort of mental break? Like, what was that? I tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't escape it. Like for 3 days in a row, stuff would happen talking about people, like Christians would talk to me about Africa and talk to me about missions. And
Yeah.
on the third day, I met this guy named Caleb Bislow, who had gone on several mission trips all around the world as a wild man, but also trains missionaries to go to the toughest to reach, remote, unreached places. And he's friends with Bear Grylls and has gone through a survival school and different stuff like that. And so, anyways, like I meet Caleb and I'm like, wow, well, if there's one dude I could tell this vision to, it's probably him. Uh, and he lives in Nebraska. I live in Colorado. I think I might not ever see this guy again. And I just tell him the vision. And when I tell him the vision, his eyes get big and he kind of like leans in. And then all of a sudden he says like, I know who they are. And I go, what? He goes, those are the Mabuti pygmies. And I'm like, who? And he's like, they're in the Congo. I'm like, where? Like, I have no clue where the Congo is or who the Mabuti pygmies are. Never heard of them. Wow. And he goes, yeah, I'm supposed to go in 3.5 weeks. I went there last year. If there's anyone that's forgotten, it's them.
Oh my gosh.
And he goes, the music you're saying, like the drumming, the singing, like that's them. And I'm like, what? And he said that he was leading a team of 3 other people, but that they had all backed out. They were all husbands and fathers, and the rebels took over the airport they were supposed to fly into. And the U.S. State Department said, it's a no-fly zone for Americans. Don't go. And his wife talked to him because he just had a newborn and said, hey, Caleb, I know you're a wild man, all this stuff, but maybe you shouldn't go. I really want you to pray about it. She said that to him the day before we met. And he prayed, is he supposed to go or not? And so him and I went, also with another friend. Man, like the vision, well, we were walking through a forest, heard some drumming, then some singing. We got in there. First guy I met had tuberculosis. And it was like the vision came true, but I still tried to doubt it, because I couldn't believe it. Like I was literally, I dropped down into like basically a squat with my hands on my face whenever I first got into the village.
Right.
And then I tried to shake it off and just meet the people and all this other stuff. But it was 3.5 weeks later, the vision's happening. And then the chief pulls us to the side, and says, hey, and I asked Caleb and Colin, I'm like, hey, like, I know this seems so wild because they're more excited than I am. they're saying, this is your vision, bro. Like, you saw this. And I'm like, yeah, I don't get it. Like, I don't know why. Like, why me? And why this and that and the other? And I'm like, can you guys just pray that we get more confirmation? We pray. Next day, Chief pulls us to the side and says, hey, just telling you a little bit about our culture, everything else. They basically told us their creation story. Their creation story summed up as God forgot about us. And that, and basically they say everyone else calls us the forest people. We call ourselves the forgotten. I mean, these are people that are enslaved, have no food, no clean water. My first introduction to the water crisis was holding a little boy named Andy Bo. And he was only 1.5 years old, and he died of waterborne disease. And I literally felt the life leave his body, which was the most wild experience and just crushing moment probably of my life. Yeah. And burying him and having blisters on my hands from us digging his grave, and not even knowing that existed before I went, that kids are dying of dirty water. Like, you might hear stuff and hear stats and hear a nonprofit talk about it, but for me, it was just going in one ear and out the other. And I wasn't, it's one thing to hear about it. It's another thing to see it. And then it's even more, it's not just a head knowledge, it's a heart knowledge. Yeah. Whenever you experience it yourself, whether it be the waterborne disease or digging the grave or whatever, like, it forever changed me, and it forever gripped my heart. Like, Andy Bo's story, and several other little kids that were, I think 6 or 7 funerals now of children under the age of 5 years old just because they don't have clean water. And
so you took action. It is brutal. It's awful. But you took action with that. Obviously, when you go through an experience like that, and this is most people when I talk to who are really, have hearts for missions, and I don't like calling it missions, but just hearts for people of other cultures or across the world, it is because they experienced it firsthand. And for you saw what they needed. They needed clean water. And suddenly out of that births this opportunity, this amazing opportunity for you to help bring clean water to this area. So talk about that and how that came about.
Yeah. So honestly, leaving my first trip, I felt probably more confused than before I went.
I can imagine.
I was really confused.
Yeah.
Coming back, I almost felt mad at God or frustrated, saying, why did you bring me here? Just to show me how small I am and how much I can't do. This problem's huge. It's insurmountable. What am I supposed to do about it? I don't know. I just felt like there's nothing I can do about it. Why did I even come here? And just to have my heart broken and to come back and feel helpless. And I actually was praying that and saying that to God, which some people, I don't know, like, for me, I just try to have a real relationship with God and be real with him and be like, God, why'd you bring me here? Like, just to like crush me. And man, I felt like God showed me like, hey, yeah, you are way too small, but like, I brought you here for a reason, a purpose. I got accepted into the tribe as family. My second trip, and after burying him, and they gave me the name Efeosa. Efeosa means the man who loves us. And that's my favorite name, and that's the name my immediate family there that adopted me and gave me. And then the rest of the tribe calls me Mabutimang Bo. And Mabutimang Bo means the big pygmy. And that's my fight name now. And so I love it. I used to be the Viking, but coming back to the sport and fighting sense, like, they call me the big pygmy. And I love that because I get to go in there and, the chief said, we don't have a voice. Can you help us have one? That was my only promise to him, because I wasn't going to be able to promise him land or water or food or that we could build a business here locally and hire on well drillers and that they could do community development projects. And man, it's just turned into so much more than I ever expected. I went back and I lived there for a year, in that 5 years, 2 months that I took off from fighting, and went and lived there for a year with intention to start a team. And man, God just lined up so many amazing Christians that are there, and just people, and not all Christians, but most are. And Man, and our goal is just to love people and to put the hands in the solution of the people who need it, or put the solution in the hands of the people that need it the most,
Right.
and to empower them. And so anyways, it's turned into something that's our first goal was 30 acres of land and 2 water wells on it for the pygmies. It's now turned into 3,000 acres of land, 68 water wells,
Wow.
uh, uh, 3 working like farming initiatives that are sustaining the villages, and they get to go to the market and sell it and make money, which in turn they're able to buy clothes really for the first time. We've seen 1,500 people transition out of a life of slavery and into a life of freedom. There's been, and there's a lot more work to do with 600,000 Mabuti pygmies probably in the rainforest there. There's not an accurate census, but anywhere from 400 to 600,000, virtually all of them call someone master. And we have 32 people on staff. It's turned into 20 full-time, 12 part-time, from community development leaders and agriculturalists and people that have replanted 4,000 trees on land that's been deforested. And man, it's just been like, what do you guys need? Let's see if we can help empower you to do it for yourselves.
Hmm.
Not that we say we don't do charity, we do opportunity. And so opportunity is greater than charity. Charity can be great, but opportunity is just always better. And so how do we go in these places I mean, I'm not against charity. Irma, Harvey, like we need
Right.
emergency response to natural disasters or war or famine or whenever people have disabilities. Like charity is needed in certain scopes, but I think charity is wrongly applied to poverty. I don't think people in poverty are looking for a handout. They're looking for a hand up.
Hmm.
And so how do we partner with them and say, you're able to do this and capable to do this and you want to do this. We see that, recognize that. You're brilliant, you're smart, you're able, you want to be the provider for your family. You want to be the one that solves your community's problems. It doesn't help whenever a charity comes in and just does it for you, because it can kind of rob people of their dignity or almost like the opportunity to feel good or proud about something. I was part of the solution. Whenever normal or just the traditional charity model comes in and pushes the villagers out of the way, not really, but just, kind of says, hey, get back. We're here to help you. You can't help yourself. I mean, just, subconsciously saying, well, you guys can't do this. We can't train you to do it. You can't afford to do it. And these tools aren't practical enough and you're not smart enough. So let us come in and do it for you and leave. The average water well only lasts 11 months in Africa.
Hmm.
There's billions of wasted charity, billions, because there's over 230,000 water wells that are broken and out of commission because one charity goes in, drills a well, there's way too much load on it. Charities somehow think one water well is going to serve thousands of people.
Right.
And so it's like you would thousands of people come in and use your kitchen sink? What would happen to that kitchen sink? It's gonna break on you pretty quick. And so people need to know how to maintenance it, repair it. It needs to be locally affordable. People need to be trained and empowered, and there needs to be a regular routine of people going and checking the water, making sure it's clean and it's not, that some kind of contaminants haven't slipped in there. And so the locals have to be empowered to do that. And my goal is like just to empower the local Christians to be the hands and feet of Christ in their own communities. And like, how can I partner with them? Like, I don't need to go in there and be the quote unquote savior, because one, I can't save anybody. Like that's God's job.
Right.
And two, like I can just empower people to do what God has called them to do, and encourage people like, hey, why are you here? Because we love you. Why do you love us? Because God loves you.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've seen a response be so much better to that than whenever the charity model, whether it's faith-based or not, being, we'll do this for you if you guys do this for us. We're going to announce ourselves by throwing a parade and having a party and getting a bunch of pictures, and we're going to leave, and we're going to think that water well always serves you for the rest of your life, and we're never going to think about, I wonder if that's still working or not. And there's no action plan in place to think a local could go out there and report back and say like, hey, it's still working, or hey, it's broken, we need to fix it. And how do we do it, and everything else. And so I don't know, I'm really, really passionate about that. That could be a whole other podcast, but
For sure.
but man, I love being able to partner with them. There's a community development center that has now been open there, where people can come and get access to land development stuff and water wells and the wash program, so sanitation and hygiene, digging latrines, even a soap production facility that we're opening up in the rainforest, and it should give jobs to 10 or 12 more people, where we have an essential oil press and soap making facility where we can get the kids all clean bars of soap, teach them the importance of clean hands, and then they can go back and teach their parents, and then the parents can go to the shop and go buy soap. And because all they have locally available to them now is car washing soap that's either from China or India. And I used it for a year, and man, it leaves you raw after you use it.
Wow. So much there to unpack. And, you know, we're short on time here, so maybe we'll just do a second podcast just on that.
Okay,
for sure.
I can do that.
But I wanted to ask you a little bit about getting back in MMA. So you're there, you actually live in the Congo for a year, which is amazing. But then suddenly MMA comes back. So quickly, just how did that come about? What led to you wanting to fight again and the opportunity to be with Bellator MMA?
Man, a lot of, after 5 years, 2 months off, I thought it was done. What athlete comes back after that long of not doing anything?
Right.
Never being, not being in the gym, not being competitive. But luckily I started when I was young at 19 professionally, and came back when I was 29, and I'm 30 right now. I came back from Congo and got married. My beautiful bride, she's a saint. Her first time ever camping was in the rainforest of Congo with the pygmies, sleeping on the dirt floors under the twig and leaf huts. And she started talking to me. She never knew me as a fighter. And I met her right after my first trip to Congo, so about a year into my faith. And she started talking to me saying, hey, have you been thinking about fighting again? And what's crazy is I had 3 kind of vivid dreams about fighting. Once was I was training for a fight. Another was I was weighing in at a fight. The third, I got into the cage, the door shut behind me, and I smiled, and I kind of slapped my shoulder, and I had a Fight for the Forgotten tattoo, which is the name of our initiative, and the name of the book that I got to write is called Fight for the Forgotten. And so I had those dreams, and then my wife starts asking me about it, and then her friend that's a missionary in Spain messages us on Facebook and says, hey, has Justin been thinking about fighting again? I had a dream. I've never even known him as a fighter, but I had a dream that he was fighting again. So anyways, after all that kind of confirmation and talking with people and saying stuff, we were thinking maybe we'll be full-time missionaries in Congo. But I think that the opportunity to fight, one, it is my first dream, and I thought I had to choose one or the other, my childhood dream or God's dream for my life. And what I found out was, man, I think they're one and the same. Psalms 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord your God, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And what I found out was the real desire in my heart is to be able to truly fight for them, to use the platform to share. My last fight was in front of 1.1 million people, and I got to talk about the pygmies. I got to speak in Swahili to them. I got to raise a ton of awareness, and then funds came from that for us to go drill a ton more water wells after my fights, and I get a win bonus. I get to give that win bonus to go drill wells. There's a show amount and there's a win amount, and so it's kind of 50-50. And so I get to give that win amount away, which I just love. And so, man, it's been an awesome opportunity to be able to come back to fight for a reason. And I've never been more passionate about it, never been more driven, and see it as an opportunity I can do for 3 to 5 more years, and maybe set up Fight for the Forgotten for the next 50 years. Get a world championship. That's my goal. Maybe several, and to do it for the right reasons, to use that platform to parlay people to support and get involved. And my sponsors that sponsor me, they sponsor water wells. And so how do we not just fight for a sport, but make it matter? And so, man, the last fight I had was just so rewarding, getting in there, fighting, winning, and then celebrating with all the people stateside that have celebrated. And then I get to go back to the Congo and, have an after party there with my pygmy family.
A celebration that will be, and really great to hear that you're fighting again, and excited to see you back in back in the octagon ring, if you will, Justin Wren. And thank you for joining us here on the podcast. I really do appreciate your heart and your story. Just a couple of more questions. First off, how can people get involved with all that you're doing in your ministry and Fight for the Forgotten? Where can people go? How can they get involved with everything you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. The book is fightfortheforgotten.org. If you get it from the website, fightfortheforgotten.org, you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. But if you get it on our website, 100% of the proceeds go straight to the cause. There's T-shirts and other things there, but also the most powerful way is, there's a donate button. People can give once, or I'd even invite, like some people say, I can't give much, but I could give this much a month. And that's honestly makes us more sustainable than a one-time gift. And so, for instance, if someone wanted to give $25 a month, over the course of a year, they'll give access to 15 people to have clean water for life. And the reason we can say for life is because we have the locals in place. It's their job. It's their business. They own it. And it's their job to make sure that water well continues to run and run and run. And if it ever dries up, they drill another one.
Right.
And so that community will have clean water. And so
Awesome.
that's a quick way. I mean, a dollar goes a long way. The average person in Congo, 74 million people, make $1 to $1.25 per day. So anything counts, anything helps, and no pressure there. But if you guys want to join forces with us and help us fight for people and knock out the water crisis, that's probably the best way. And on the website, it's called Team Watermark. So how we can make our mark on the water crisis.
Love it. Fightfortheforgotten.org is the website. You can also find Justin on Twitter, and he's a good follow. I'm following him on there at The Big Pygmy, which is obviously, it has to be your Twitter name, right?
Yeah.
And Pygmy is spelled Pygmy, The Big Pygmy. So check him out on Twitter. And last question, Justin, and we ask this to all of our guests, and I'm just curious for you, with everything you've been through, what has the Lord been teaching you during this time right now? What is he teaching you?
Honestly, it would be how much I need him. It would be that I'm so much less without him, and basically I'm nothing without him. I mean, I can try and I can be strong and I can be this and that, but really, I would say that, being just a fighter guy, a bigger dude, an athlete, and look strong on the outside, like, man, I'm weak like anyone else, maybe weaker than the most. And so I truly, truly need God. And so kind of that whole prayer, in that verse, less of me, more of you, God. Like that's what I need. That's what I want. That's what this world is looking for. Isn't me, but is you. And so less of me, God, more of you.
Absolutely. And one of our life verses with Sports Spectrum and the ministry that we have is John 3:30, which is he must increase, we must decrease. And just wanted to send that out as an encouragement, not just for you, Justin, but for all the listeners to really cling to that verse and the idea of what the increase is in Christ versus the decrease in us. So, man, this has been great. And there's so much more. I'm sure you have about 1,000 other stories that you could have told during this podcast. So hopefully we'll have you back. But Justin Wren, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and just, we're all fans of you now, man. We're rooting for you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. And it might sound weird to close with this, but if the listeners, who I know you have a loyal following, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And if you haven't seen the episode with Kelly Masters, she's my sports agent, and she is just the real deal. So go back and check out that episode here on the Sports Spectrum with Kelly Masters.
Absolutely. Shout out to Kelly. She was great on the podcast, man.
Yeah.
Justin, thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. That's all I can say when I listen to that. I've listened to this interview back like 3 or 4 times as I've edited it, and just wow. I mean, Justin Wren has lived an incredible life. He really has. The lowest of lows, and the things that he's doing now, and using his name and his platform to bring glory to God and to impact others. We're just thankful to have Justin Wren join us here on the podcast and share his story. And we hope to have him back, because we didn't even scratch the surface on the stories that this guy has and can tell. We just didn't want this podcast to be 4 hours, because it could have easily gone that long. But check out Justin's ministry and all that he's doing at fightfortheforgotten.org, fightfortheforgotten.org, and just just celebrate what the man is doing and what God is doing through him, because it's a pretty awesome thing. We thank you so much again for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Once again, you can reach us on Twitter at sports_spectrum. On Facebook, you can just search Sports Spectrum and all of our content is there. You can reach me on Twitter at Jason Romano, and just leave a review on iTunes. If you want to give us some feedback, let us know what you think of the show, what your thoughts are on the podcast, any guest ideas, any of that. You can leave us a review on iTunes or just reach us on social media. And again, everything else, anything regarding Sports Spectrum is at sportspectrum.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast.